also waiting on Stan and Glenn, but I do want to be cognizant of everybody's time here and the short time that we do have together today. So if everyone's comfortable here, we can begin. This is the second session here for the work groups. For those who don't know me, I'm John Baird. I'm a senior consultant with PSC, and I'll facilitate the group here today. We'll kind of cut to the chase here, and I believe that Dan has some background information that he'll be able to share for the department regarding the evaluations, inspections, and surveillance monitoring. So Dan, if you're ready, I'll turn it right over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'll start off by apologizing because we pulled these together pretty last minute and quickly. So it's a lot of words, not a lot of pretty pictures. I'll try not to bore you to death and make it quick. So looking at, oops, let's see. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're looking at reevaluations, inspections, and surveillance monitoring. Diving right in, reevaluations. So this involves an in-depth engineering investigation and analyses to determine basically whether or not a dam meets modern dam safety standards. We currently do not require reevaluations of any of our dams. And quite frankly, there are a lot of dams that were constructed prior to modern engineering era. Under parts 307 and 315, we do require periodic visual inspections of our regulated dams. And through that process, we can require additional engineering evaluations and analyses if we identify concerns or issues. ASDSO recommends requiring that high and significant hazard dams perform these periodic reevaluations or independent comprehensive reviews on a 10-year max cycle. Currently, FERC requires project reevaluation every 5 years, and this looks at a myriad of different things, including PFMAs, surveillance and monitoring plans, operation and maintenance, and supporting technical information. So this is basically, the supporting technical information is kind of this document that's the running log of all of the engineering analyses that have gone into this dam, including construction documents and things of that nature. And then documents are updated to keep a continuous record, as I said. As we look at our inspections under 315, we've got various inspection cycles depending on the hazard classification, ranging from 3 to 5 year cycles. And as you can see here, ASDSO has provided us recommendations for more frequent inspections of the high and significant hazard dams. And then under part 307, which is our legal lake level structures, we have a 3-year inspection cycle. Our inspections must be conducted by a licensed professional engineer. So for privately owned dams or municipalities who want to have a consultant do it, they need to go out and get a licensed professional engineer. Otherwise, the state performs inspections for state-owned, or our dam safety program, Luke and I, inspect the state-owned dams as well as any municipalities that request that we inspect them. The goal of these inspections is to identify early warning signs of potential failure modes. Also, we look at any of the monitoring instrumentation they may have, talk with the owners about any O&M needs they may have, and then we make recommendations in order to meet safety standards. And so this could include more detailed analyses. And then at the end of an inspection, we assign an overall condition assessment for the dam. As I said, we inspect the state-owned and municipally owned dams. This equates to about 40 to 80 inspections each year by Luke and I. And then we review anywhere from 150 to 250 reports from consultants every year. So our winter times are really quite busy. So things that we look for during these inspections is stability of the embankment and structures. We reevaluate the spillways or the dam's spillway capacity to ensure that it's meeting the requirements there. And then we look for any just visual indicators such as erosion, seepage, vegetation cover and quality, wildlife damage, or any deterioration to any of the concrete surfaces or structures. Historically, we've kind of adopted NRCS's dam safety checklist. You know, we more or less follow this. We've kind of, honestly, we've gotten to the point where we've done a lot of these so many times, we don't always necessarily use the checklist itself specifically, but we have kind of our own reporting format that we follow. We are actually in the process right now of implementing a Survey 123 tool or a form where we go out and can very quickly input data into our devices, our phones, while we're out doing the inspections, take photos, and then ideally from that, we'll be able to generate reports pretty rapidly. And it ensures that we're covering all the various aspects of the dam. So looking at inspections, ASDSO recommends that we amend the frequency for our inspections for the high and significant hazard dams. They also recommend that we establish construction inspection requirements for the design engineer and the dam safety staff. I talked about this under our permitting subgroup as well. When we permit construction projects, we don't actually have a specific requirement that they need to report back to us on any of their inspections. And unfortunately, just due to staffing limitations, we don't often get out or often enough get out to construction projects to inspect ourselves. And then developing standard inspection checklist and report form, which, like I said, we've kind of actually have had. It's just formalizing that maybe a little bit more and making it more readily available for consultants. On surveillance monitoring, we do not currently have surveillance monitoring requirements under the dam safety program. There are some dams in Michigan, typically our high hazard and some of our significant hazard dams do have surveillance instrumentation. It's the responsibility of the owner to monitor their equipment and you know, document that as appropriate. But we typically don't evaluate that data. It's just not one of our requirements right now. Excuse me. So when we talk about surveillance monitoring, what are we looking at? This is everything from water levels and pore water pressures within the dam or its embankments. It's looking at gate operations. You know, what are the opening and closing and timing of that relative to events, as well as just monitoring water levels upstream and downstream and flows. Seepage. So how much water is coming through the dam. These are typically weirs and sometimes gauges. Settlement is the embankment moving, and this is measured with settlement plates or survey monuments. Inclinometers, looking at whether things are changing in slope or tilting for concrete structures. And then things like crack and joint monitoring and rain and flow gauges. So ASDSO recommends that we develop a set of requirements for surveillance monitoring, specifically for high and significant hazard dams. In addition to, you know, what ASDSO is recommending, their specific requirement was associated with things like settlement and deformity of the dam. We also have identified some issues within the department associated with independent operation of dams during flood events. And so we also would look at recommending a development of watershed plans for systems where we've got multiple dams, particularly in series. The Tittabawassee and Tobacco are perfect examples because we've got numerous high hazard dams in series on both those river branches. And we obviously saw, you know, detrimental impacts in this past event. Just to throw kind of a quick plug out there, NRCS actually has developed a software tool or worked with a company to develop a software tool called Dam Watch. And this program actually functions both as a dams database, housing all of the information about their dams, including documentation, as well as providing monitoring of the dams. So any telemetry data that's available, either for settlement, seepage, whatever else, as well as incorporating flow and rain gauge data. And then based on the characteristics of the dam, can provide operational recommendations, we'll say, for the dam owners as well as emergency response capabilities for the emergency managers within that region. So there are certainly a lot of benefits to having a package like this available. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily cheap, but just wanted to throw something out there as an idea of what may be available to, from a program standpoint, to help facilitate something like that. And I think I ran through that about as quick as I could. So now I'll hand it off and you guys can walk through the various recommendations.
Okay, appreciate that background, Dan. I'm gonna change our tact here from our last session and just assume that everybody has read the materials that were provided beforehand. This group has 5 recommendations within the reevaluation, inspection, and surveillance monitoring approach or portions of the report. So just as a baseline question here, are there any recommendations that members here don't believe should move forward in this group's report to Eagle and the legislature? Just pause here and make sure everyone's.
Do we have a one page that we can put back up in front of folks?
Sure, happy to do that.
I think it just might help germinate thinking.
Okay, can everybody see the screen here?
Yep.
Okay, great.
I'm going to put my disclaimer in here that I mentioned in the last group that I was in, which is that all of this requires resources. And so just know that when we bring it all together, we're going to have to think about how do we be clear, because when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So that's my speech.
Thank you.
Good speech, Liesl.
Okay. So just a baseline here, are there any recommendations put forth through the ASDO report that this group would say shouldn't move forward in the process? And if we hear none on that, then we'll open it up for discussion on which of those recommendations this group needs to discuss further.
I will be honest. I don't know that I can support the first one, 11A. It sounds great, and you may say, "Well, why would you not want that?" I just don't understand how that's feasible with our current structure. That I'm having to do this right now, and it's tremendous levels of resource. And to just arbitrarily tell everybody you got to reassess your dam, even on a 10-year periodicity, just to do it the first time on a 100-year-old structure. I mean, honestly, we are not struggling, but we are recognizing the significant level of resource need to do what FERC is asking of us as they are ramping up their requirements for the 5-year deep dives, they're calling them now. And I don't believe that's a realistic expectation with our current ownership structure. That I mean, it sounds great and it sounds like that's a no-brainer, but I don't know that I can support that, because I think in many cases you're gonna not be able to do that because of the ownership structure that we have. And Lisa, I know you're gonna get tired of me bringing up the resource question and the ownership question, but
Not. I'm going to say here, John, and you've just demonstrated why I'm so thrilled that you said yes, because I look at the ASDSO reports and the recommendations, they all look fantastic, but there has to be some practicality to doing them. And I think you're asking the right questions, which is what's the practicality of some of these recommendations? So thank you.
I mean, to be honest with you, because I have some dams that are broaching 110, 120 years old. And regardless of what they were constructed to, or, in relation to current standards, what you really care about is, are they adequate from a safety standpoint today? And that's where I think You know, the technical people would say, no, you need to go back to original design standards and do a complete evaluation, hire a team of experts, redo all the structural calcs and the hydraulic stuff. And I don't know that that matters if you can assess its structural adequacy today. Now, they'll tell you that, well, unless I know what it was built to and, you know, the design calculations and all that stuff, you don't really know based on a visual inspection. But I just don't know that that's a realistic recommendation that I could support, trying to subject all of our dam owners in the state of Michigan to for the benefit received.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, I was
You're muted.
just going to ask the question of, for reevaluation, does that inherently mean going all the way back to, you know, their original construction and understanding the original design intent, or is it just looking at current standards based on current field findings? Does it meet current standards?
Well, I read what they have here. They say, you know, independent comprehensive reviews to cover all aspects of original design, failure modes, even the failure modes and effects analysis is very complex stuff. And I'm just saying, I don't think it's realistic.
It would likely include some of the other items too that we've been talking about, like the surveillance monitoring. You know, that's part of FERC's scope of work in this task. But to complement what John was saying, you know, our effort that we do, this effort as it applies to FERC is for each dam on the order of like $35,000 to $70,000 for us to do just for one dam. It's exhaustive, and I note that not only is it very intensive for the dam owner, but it's equally as intensive for the regulatory agency, you know, to review and follow up and digest and then do something with this report. There's a lot of value in it, but I took each recommendation from ASDSO and I thought about it from the standpoint of how much level of effort does it require the owner to do, and how much level of effort does it ultimately impact the, in this case, Eagle and the state, because that I believe should have some sort of, it should be reflected in our recommendation. You know, Dan talked about phasing and not overloading the program in the first year, things like that.
Yeah, I think we certainly appreciate and want to hear more about that perspective. John and Glenn, would you like to work offline here from the meeting today and draft some proposed changes or modifications to that recommendation that you could bring back to the group, and we could continue that conversation at our fourth meeting?
Absolutely.
Sure.
If I could make just one brief comment here, I feel like having some kind of a supporting technical information document on these higher potential hazard dams would be a benefit. What seems to be lacking on a lot of these state dams is just sort of a ongoing record of the thing, you know, and that's what the STID does. It just sort of gives you the ongoing construction history, collection of the other big thing that I think is helpful, and I respect what John's saying on here, but I think some kind of idea of probable failure modes, a discussion of where is this dam likely to fail, and sort of making those focal points. And often these are just tabletop exercises where people, you know, go through what they think could happen there. So I think something would be helpful here, but I totally understand the reticence of going all the way with what you've got with a Part 12D with FERC. So anyway, just to throw that in there.
This is Bill. I'm going to agree with Paul. I think I don't want to throw out the entire recommendation. If you guys can work on something that you think is more appropriate, that does in some way assess risk, that would be fine.
Thank you, Bill.
Got it.
Okay.
What I don't see in this section, which surprised me, was reporting requirements. So, you know, we're addressing evaluations and inspections, but, you know, we have to report to FERC all the time, right? And so there's a reporting threshold that you notify your regulator of when something, you know, abnormal has happened, when a concern or a deviation has developed. And so you know, I do agree with this surveillance that there should be some requirement on the surveillance, but I don't see addressed here. And maybe it's out of scope for what we're doing today, but when does the owner have an obligation to inform the state outside of an emergency that I've got, you know, an abnormality or an out of tolerance condition?
That's a great point. It's a great point.
Very good.
Yeah, and in terms of process here, we're hoping to review the ASDO recommendations here today. And then at the fourth meeting, that's the opportunity where we'd encourage members to bring forth new recommendations. So if there are items here that aren't reflected in these recommendations but are important, we'd encourage you to spend some time thinking about that, even putting pen to paper, you know, and bring it back to this group for consideration at our next series of meetings.
John, we're refining this first one. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Oh, sure.
That sounds great. So are there other recommendations here from the ASDO report that this group feels should be revised? We've talked about 11A, and maybe we can take 12A, B, and C as a series here.
I guess
Sten Baton here. I have to apologize. My Zoom crashed, which never happened ever in my life. So it started in March. But anyway, just Dan, just quick question. A mine in the UP has to go through your office for a permit, correct, for a tailings dam?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so when the tailings dam is complete and capped, does that then fall out of your system, or does that have to continue with the dam safety permit and follow the surveillance that we're talking about here, just as information?
I think a lot of it depends on the makeup of what's in the tailings, but typically when they go through a closure process, it's no longer considered a dam. It's basically at that point becomes, you know, just a large mound. But again, it depends on the makeup of the material that are in the tailings.
Okay, so basically, or possibly, a mine tailings, once it's complete and capped, it could fall out of the system and not have to maintain these regulations, surveillance and reporting and all this.
Correct. As part of the closure plan, there's usually a period of surveillance and monitoring that's required. But, you know, absent any irregularities or changes, then I believe they no longer have to continue that.
Good, thanks.
John, 12A, B, and C, I guess my initial comment is just simply that not commenting on whether it's good or bad, they have a big impact on the level of effort by the state. A significant effort, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, for saying that. I was going to say, if nobody else brought that up, I was going to throw it out there that this is one of those areas where phasing would be a good discussion or addition to.
Right.
So right now, the inspections for high hazard are every 2 years, and for significant hazard, it's every, go ahead, say that again, Dan, it's 3?
High hazard is every 3 years, significant is 4, and low is 5. The recommendation is that high would be 1.
1. Mm-hmm.
significant would be 2, and then low would stay at 5.
Okay.
That would be a pretty substantial uptick in our number of inspections that we would have
What do you think that would require in terms of additional staff?
I mean, boy, I'd have to run through all the numbers, to be honest with you. I'm not certain. I would say, just for that alone, not all of the other aspects of our work, you're probably looking at least 2 or 3 more staff to cover inspections and review of inspection reports.
Dan, it's probably a case where you wouldn't even know the answer to that at the start. And you could estimate, but you might want to start out with like the general service contracts that we talked about in the previous breakout group.
Yep.
And utilize the services of consulting assistants to get a better handle on workloads and FTE requirements.
Yep, agreed.
Just as a reminder to folks, we were given the authority to do some additional hiring already. So there's additional hiring. So just not that we still need to do a workload analysis and understand what's additionally necessary, but just trying to bring that back to front of mind.
Yeah, I mean, you can do the math real quick. You're doing about 50 inspections a year, Dan, you and Luke. And if you're going to do all 85 high hazard and then half of the low, you're already up in excess of 150, 160 inspections a year. So at minimum, you're going to have to triple your staff size.
Yep, agreed.
On the point of 12B, DSP staff inspecting the construction project, I guess I would just say or ask, what is the purpose of DSP's inspections? I think it's good for DSP to be there for your own information and familiarity and to be conversant in the project. But I guess what I'm getting at is you're not putting yourself in the position of approving or not the construction work, are you? So it might just be good to clarify what the goal is of your inspections during construction before deciding how many times you think you should go out there.
So again, this would probably be similar to some of our other statutory areas, such as in lakes and streams and wetlands, where they do, or they're supposed to go out there as well during construction. And it's not that we're necessarily, approving the project, in its construction. We still do leave that on the engineer of record, but it's just a verification. And I think explicitly ASDSO was looking at things like first fill or first refill. Right. For earth and embankments and things like that, to observe how those respond.
I guess I'll just share, when I read this, I thought of the federal requirements that I have from FERC in this regard for construction phases. And they do have a significant amount of requirements that we have to meet. And I just considered if this 12B included any of that. FERC, as part of construction phase, they require a temporary construction EAP to be developed. How to handle emergencies during this particular construction project. They require a quality control inspection report and a plan. How does the owner and the consulting engineer, how do they confirm quality and construction requirements? How do they confirm all that was met? And then they have a lot of post-construction requirements too, reports, photos, assessments, and ultimately a testament to the completion in meeting the standards of the design. So it could go quite a bit further, and I'm not suggesting that it does. All I'm suggesting is that FERC does have a lot more regarding the construction inspection requirements. for projects.
Yeah, I should also state that currently under the statute and under our permitting authority that we do require that the work be completed under the observation of a licensed engineer. And especially for, for individual permits. And so on those projects, they are required to report back to us, basically certification that the project was completed under their observation and to the, according to the plan specifications and permit.
Well, Dan, let me ask you this. Would this, given what this says here, that you're going to go out and meet with the design engineer and observe something, is that helpful to you?
Really depends on the project. But to be completely honest, really, I think we're still going to rely on the design engineer to
Yeah.
provide that service. They're the ones stamping it and signing off on it. For us, it's going to be going out at critical moments, and essentially verifying what they're telling us.
Is that helpful to you? Or not?
It's a case by case basis. It depends on the project, the owner, and the engineer.
So if you had the authority to do so, but could make the decision whether or not to do it, does that help you? In other words, you're not required to do it, but you have the authority to do so.
Yes, and I mean, we have the authority to do that now, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and take a look at the statute and the rules as far as the requirement for the designer. Like I said, I know it's stated in the permits that we require that the work be done under the observation of the engineer. So we have it there. I'd have to take a look at the statute again to double check and determine whether or not we need additional language that actually requires them to be there, or if there's.
Could you do that? Could you take a look at that?
Yeah, I'll do that real quick.
Hey Dan, a quick question: how many significant and high-risk dams are non-FERC or not FERC dams?
Great question.
The state.
Oh, what is it? It's like 82 or something like that that are high hazard.
Or significant hazard.
Significant.
Those are the 4-year review.
Wasn't it 100? We just did this in the last work group.
Yeah.
John probably remembers the numbers.
High and 135 or so ish significant hazard.
Yep. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Like
So Dan,
the total population.
significant is 4-year review.
Mm-hmm.
Right now.
So the Red Ridge Dam would be a 4-year significant dam.
Yes, if it's significant, I'd have to go back and double check it as to classification.
Would you consider that this part, the 11A, would apply to the Red Ridge Dam?
Oh, absolutely, it would.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd go to every 2 years.
Hey, Dan, are recommendations 12B and 12D above and beyond what is currently in place?
Sorry, I got to switch back to the other document. What was 12?
So 12B is construction inspection requirements for design engineer and DSP staff, and 12D is basically, frequent inspections during construction, alteration, repair, and first filling. Is that above and beyond what you currently have in place?
I would say yes, in that it's, like I said, I need to double check. I think we actually require the design engineer to be out on, I know we do under the permits, we require the design engineer to be out on site during construction. The specific times when they need to be out there, which is covered under D, is not currently covered.
Okay.
We do not have specific points that we require them to be there.
Yeah, based on that, I would not recommend advancing 12B and 12D, because I think you already have the latitude to insert yourselves and inspect where you feel it is necessary. And I don't think the gain we get by having additional requirements for these inspections are worth where we want to direct our resources at this time. So that's my input to the group.
Although I would argue that making certain that they have the right to do so if desired,
Right.
ought to be clear. And if that's a little foggy in either and Dan's going to look at that in the statute or in the rules, then let's clear that up.
We're saying make sure it's permissive.
Make sure it's permissive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Make sure the staff can go double check on things.
So Dan, between now and our next meeting, can we ask you to look into that status here and report back out to the group?
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, I don't want you to get, we had a discussion about liability for the staff in the last one. I don't want you to get sued by somebody because you think you got to go out and take a look at something. I mean, there's got to be a balance here.
Yep.
Okay. Quick time check here. We have about 7 minutes left in our scheduled time. Appreciate the discussion here so far. I do want to make sure that we're also talking about the surveillance monitoring. So if folks want to take a little bit of time here and review that recommendation, number 13A. Are there items within this that we need to discuss? And Bill?
Does FERC require that already? Guys that are FERC regulated?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wires. Well, the surveillance and monitoring, here this is where I would disagree. It says determine here what the surveillance and monitoring should be, but that falls out of the PMFs. So you go to the first thing we discussed, which is where are the probable failure modes, and then good engineering judgment based on those determines where your surveillance and monitoring needs to be. And so I think that's where it should be driving it, not just a mandate to say every dam's got to monitor this, that, and the other thing.
So Paul, one of my first questions in that regard, regarding this ASDSO recommendation specifically, was, are they talking about existing surveillance monitoring, and what does the dam owner need to do with that existing data? Or is this establishing requirements for all dam owners to install new surveillance monitoring, basically adding to their efforts, and then begin a monitoring program from there? So is it, I guess I just wanted some clarity where this recommendation was directed to.
Well, you guys already do it, right? For FERC regulated. I guess
Correct.
the question I would have is, what about the non-FERC regulated? And again, to me, I'd put you guys aside. You're already doing that because you're doing that under FERC. But for the non-FERC regulated, if the department determines that the installation of surveillance monitoring equipment at the non-FERC regulated dams is required for a specific dam, I guess what I'm saying is the department staff ought to have the discretion to make those kind of requirements. That's what I would argue.
Yeah, the way it's written right now, it's so loose. It says as appropriate, right? So
And what does that as appropriate mean, right?
You can do it or not do it. I can advance that because there are cases where you definitely want to be monitoring with these types of equipment because of the failure modes potential.
Right.
So it sounds like what we're hearing is that there's agreement that staff should have this authority, but it should probably be a little bit clearer here on just what that means, and perhaps more of a risk-based approach, but not that this should be done in all instances, but as appropriate and as the condition and risk and hazard rating of the dam applies. Is that a fair summary?
And I would be willing to go further and say that let's exempt FERC regulated dams from that requirement, because it's already being done. Correct?
Yeah, I don't think anything we're discussing as a task force has to do with the FERC regulated dams, right?
Yeah, I don't think we have authority over them.
Right.
Okay. I think we can work on some modified wording for that for the group to consider for the next meeting.
Let me ask Dan a question. Dan, are there dams out there where you would like to require some monitoring equipment?
So, like I said, I certainly think there's some benefit to having some additional monitoring equipment on dams, just so that we can better ascertain changes that are occurring over time. Whether it's weirs for seepage, piezometers, wells, even survey monuments. There's things that can be put in place relatively inexpensively that can be there, and we just simply have to require the owners to provide that information periodically. Maybe even if it's at the inspection frequency. But where I see actually probably the greatest benefit isn't necessarily on what they're asking for with piezometers and kilometers and settlement monuments, but instead more so on flow management, associated with flood events, and having telemetry available to where we can understand how various dams on a single system are operating, such that we're not creating detrimental impacts to downstream facilities. I think that would be extremely beneficial.
So would you want that on all high hazard dams and all significant hazard dams, or do you want the discretion to be able to decide that this dam needs it?
Certainly the discretion, and I think in watersheds where we have them in series, particularly,
good point.
That is something where it's even more important.
Right. So you could write a rule or a regulation that said where there are dams in series, then blah blah blah. You could do that.
Dan, are you talking about putting in USGS gauging stations?
Whether it's gauging stations or even if it's owner operated instrumentation. I know some of the dam owners have water level loggers and gate sensors and things like that on their facilities, and they have that data readily available to them. It would just be making it available to our program. And really it's more so about them really making it readily available amongst the other dam owners and operators within that system, such that they all know what they're dealing with and what's coming.
I think the other thing where this needs some clarity is on the reporting part of it too.
Appreciate that discussion there. I do want to note here, we are at noon here, which is our scheduled time. I think if folks are interested, we could certainly continue the conversation a little bit here, but we do want to be respectful, of other folks who may have other commitments. To recap our meeting here, John and Glenn volunteered to propose some revisions to that first recommendation, number 11A, that they'll bring back to the group at our next meeting. Dan was going to do a little bit of research here on 12, the recommendations on 12 and just what's covered under the existing authority that the department has there. And for 13, I think a lot of great discussion here on what that should cover. And I think I'll volunteer here to draft some wording here based on the discussion, and I may reach out to a few members to review that here ahead of the next meeting.
And then remind me, John, we're also to think about white space and bring back suggestions that we have for recommendations that aren't cataloged here for the next meeting.
That is correct. Yep.
Yeah.
So for our next meeting, we'll continue these conversations. And as Director Clark said, that's also the opportunity to talk more about what additional recommendations are needed. Okay, well, we do want to thank everyone for their time and the commitment to this effort. And we'll be in touch here with with some follow-up.
Thank you.
Buddy, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.